Here we go.
This is Skip One-on-One, brought to you by FanDuel, the nation's #1 sports book. If you have an ounce of interest in college basketball, you know Jay Bilas, who just dominates the sport in words spoken and written and in games predicted. Jay, to me, is the ultimate source on college basketball. He's the conscience of college basketball, but with a great sense of self-deprecating humor. Jay played college basketball at the highest level, played in the 1986 championship game for Duke. He coached college basketball at the highest level as an assistant for Coach K. He graduated from Duke Law School, and for 30 years now, he's been laying down the law on college basketball for ESPN. And Jay joins me now, and I do appreciate, Jay, your time and your wisdom and the few words that you have left in that great body of yours. Are you about talked out?
Yeah, this time of year is always a challenge because everybody seems to be interested in the tournament more so than the regular season. But it's a blast. It's my favorite time of year.
Well, you are it. And by the way, speaking of law school, I think you still, in your spare time, practice a little law in Charlotte. Is that right?
Yes and no. Yeah, so I'm still licensed to practice. I'm still with my firm, but I don't practice full time anymore. My designation now is called of counsel, which is the lawyerly hoity-toity way of saying that I race all the old guys to the elevator at lunch and probably don't come back.
Well, I would think some clients would pay your hourly fee just to talk college hoops with you. Does that happen occasionally?
I wish that happened. I do get people that want to talk about it, but not for my hourly fee.
All right. So just a quick bit of background about you. You were obviously a very good high school basketball player out here in the LA area, top 50 national recruit. You averaged 24 and 14 your senior season in what's called Rolling Hills Estates on the Palos Verdes Peninsula. How did you grow up? What kind of family did you grow up in? Was it a sports crazed family?
I wouldn't say sports crazed. I have an older brother who was an athlete growing up. He's 7 years older, and he played. He was my idol growing up and still is in most every way. But I got into sports because of him. And, neither one of my parents had the opportunity to go to college. They grew up in San Pedro, California, where I was born. Yeah. And my dad moved the family to Rolling Hills, and it was an idyllic place to grow up because, as you know, it's on a little peninsula, and I didn't realize this until later, but it's the furthest point from a freeway in LA.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So people didn't go, and it wasn't that far. There's a freeway near everybody in LA, but people didn't go there unless they had business there. It wasn't kind of one of these pass-through towns where there's a whole lot of traffic. So it was a great place to grow up. I walked to school every day up until I went to high school, stuff like that. And but I started playing as a kid, like most kids, and I played almost every sport except my parents wouldn't let me play football till high school.
Really?
And I loved it. I loved growing up there. And but back then it was different. Not everybody was a doctor or lawyer or Hollywood type. It was very middle class, and now it's one of the more expensive zip codes in the country.
Yeah.
But Chuck Norris was a neighbor of ours.
Really?
He had a karate. This was before he became a movie star. He had a karate studio, and was still a pro karate guy, and had a studio near where kids would take karate lessons. I never did, but yeah, we always have that in our back pocket. The Chuck Norris was lived in our neighborhood.
And by the way, would you call yourselves middle class? I don't know what your father did for a living, but at that point it was more middle classy.
Oh yeah, my dad. I mean, we never wanted for anything. My dad was a TV repairman. He had his own, you remember those days back when TV sets were furniture.
Do I?
And, you had big consoles. And so my dad had his own store. He had two of them actually called Anthony's TV, and he sold TVs and then he serviced them. He fixed them. So he would go on house calls. And when I got old enough, I would go with him, and not all the time, but I would, would go with him probably when my mom wanted me out of the house, and I would have to
Yeah.
go on service calls with him and help him carry the TVs out, these big consoles that had turntables in them. And God forbid I banged one of those things on a doorway, because he's like, "Hey man, I got to pay for that. If you scratch that
Exactly.
thing, I got to pay for it." So I had to actually be mindful of that.
So you turned into a 6'8" bruiser of a basketball player. What happened in football? Did you play tackle, or what? Where did they stick you initially?
I didn't play football. My dad said you can play football when you get to high school, because he thought I wouldn't want to, because I played baseball and basketball growing up. So I
Yeah.
played baseball in high school for a year, and then I concentrated solely on basketball. But I didn't want any part of football. And then,
Oh,
oddly
okay.
enough, because I was not a bruising player in high school,
Huh.
I was recruited by a lot of people as kind of a three man, and actually
Really? Huh.
Houston recruited me. They thought I could play a two guard position, which I thought was kind of odd. But when I got to Duke, I had to play center, so I had to bulk up, and I was playing against guys a lot bigger. And after my senior year ended, the Washington Redskins called and asked me to come to training camp.
Really?
They thought I could be a tight end. That was back. Remember, that was back when the NFL was experimenting with players from other sports. Ronaldo Nehemiah was
The
playing.
Cowboys did that a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, and there were a bunch
Mhm.
of basketball players that were thought they could be tight ends. Some of them did it. James McDonald played for the Rams, was a basketball player
Yeah.
almost exclusively, and so I thought about it for about a half an hour, and then I called him back and said, I don't think I
Came to
want
your
to do
senses.
that. They twist me
Yeah.
into a pretzel. I want to remain walking upright for the rest of my life.
Exactly. Well, I'm surprised that you weren't a bruiser in high school, because when I watched in college, you were a tough guy. I mean, you bang bodies, you move people in the lane, and you're saying in high school you were a little more finesse. Did you shoot? There wasn't a 3-point shot yet, I don't
No,
guess. Yeah. So did you shoot outside? Did you shoot? Yeah.
I did. Yeah. So I was more of a inside outside threat back then, but when I got to college. And people were negatively recruited against Duke when I was being recruited, saying, "Hey, if you go to Duke, they're going to make you play center, and that's not your position." And I asked
Wow.
Coach K about that, and he said, "Well, for a year, yeah, you'd have to play center, because we don't have anybody to do it as well as you can."
Huh.
But he guaranteed me he'd recruit somebody and move me back over, and he did. He recruited guys, but they never moved me out. So I played there 4 years. So I guess those guys were right, but I never worried about it. I was just lucky to be there.
So you tried to bulk up then? Did you try to gain weight and hit the weight room?
I did. In between my sophomore and junior year, I realized this probably isn't going to change. I'm going to be a center, and I'm going to have to be stronger. And so I spent the entire summer, and there was one of my high school teachers owned a muscle gym where a lot of bodybuilders and
Yeah.
kind of professional, and a lot of cops. I lifted weights with a lot of cops.
Hmm.
But all summer long I lifted, and I put on about 25 pounds of muscle, and went from being a relatively thin 6'8" guy to a bulked up, a lot stronger.
You were.
Yeah, so that changed but then after I graduated, I realized there's no way that that's going to last for my professional career. So I probably lost in between my senior year and my first year playing pro ball overseas. I bet you I slimmed down 20, 25 pounds again and got back
Really?
to my normal
Huh.
weight. Yeah.
What do you think your top weight was your last year at Duke?
245 probably.
Whew. Really?
Yeah. I would say in the 245 range. And it was
Huh.
mostly kind of upper body stuff. I was carrying way too much weight because of that, and I had to eat more than I wanted to keep it on. But when it wasn't like I had to go on this radical weight loss program, it kind of naturally came off when I stopped doing all that stuff, drinking protein shakes and all
Yeah.
that business. But there were people at the time, they were going, "Hey man, are you roided up or something?" And I'm like, "No, I never even thought about that. Maybe I should have.
Yeah.
It would have made things easier."
Exactly. So you were the classic below the rim rebounder then, right?
I got above the rim once in a while, but yeah, I mean, I was I was a good college player, and I was one of those guys. Skip, being completely honest about it, if I had gone somewhere else, I would have been an all league player
Yeah.
somewhere else. but
Sure.
I was better off being at Duke, playing a role on a great team. It was a lot more fun winning than it was, getting some all league trophy and not going anywhere.
By the way, your recruiting class became the all-time scoring class in college history with Johnny Dawkins and Allery and David Henderson and you, right? I mean, you guys stayed the duration, but that was some firepower.
We were lucky. I mean, part of that, being completely straightforward, was we all started as freshmen because Duke didn't have anybody to keep us out of the lineup. So we probably, it was like us and Georgia Tech when they had Mark Price and John Sally and all those guys. They were our direct peers and probably our biggest rivals then because of that. But we had the opportunity to play. Back then, you didn't see freshmen start. You might see one freshman. You didn't see 4 or 5 of them starting. No. That was out of need, more so than it was out of if they had better players. We couldn't move those guys out. Some of us could. Johnny Dawkins could have. The rest of us, maybe not.
Yeah. Okay. Your fondest or least fondest memory of that 86 championship game against Louisville and Dallas?
The fondest memory was the experience of it.
Yeah.
The least fondest was obviously losing. We felt like we were the better team. At that time, we had won more games. Going into that game, we'd set a record for wins in a season. Nobody'd won 37 games. That would have been our 38th win, which would still be a record if we had won that. And we got beat by a bucket. And Louisville was great. We thought we were better. I think if we played them, I still think this, we played them 10 times, we would have won 7.
I would agree with that.
But we lost.
Unfortunately, a freshman named Never Nervous Purvis had the game of his life against you, right? That night, 25 and 11.
He played great, but they had so many good players. Like Herb Crook was great. Their whole team played great. But mostly that was one of the only games of the year where we shot a really low percentage. They shot over 50%, and we shot in the 30s, and we lost by a bucket. And we had the lead late in the game, and we went into what we called a motion delay. It was called 2-3 motion. We probably went in a little too early, honestly. But what are you going to do? Like, we had never lost doing that, and we lost that game doing that. But if you kind of look back on that, the fine line, I don't know if you remember this. It was in Dallas, where you were writing for the Dallas Morning News at the time.
I was at the Times Herald, but I was sitting on press row. I was right there. Yeah.
The discussion, so you may remember the discussion after we beat Kansas in the semifinal. Yeah. On that, all the papers that Sunday were talking about, okay, where does this Duke team rank among the greatest teams of all time?
Yep.
Kind of like the USC Texas football game, with Vince Young and Matt Leinart. And
Reggie White. I agree. Yep.
So they would do these side-by-side comparisons of the teams. They say, all right, well, Duke versus UCLA 69. All right, well, Johnny Dawkins is better than Mike Warren, and Mark Allery is better than Keith Erickson. And then it would get to Jay Bilas, Lou Alcindor. My teammates were killing me going, hey, you're losing every one of these things. Like, we're the donut team. And I was like, well, how about you and I switch positions? And you see how you fare against Walton or Alcindor or these guys.
Well, how about you grow about 6 inches, right?
Yeah, and become more talented. Growing wouldn't have mattered, but I guess my point in all that, it wasn't. That was the funny part. But when we lost that game, all the discussion about how great we were went away, and the line between greatest of all time and you were there is a pretty thin one. It turns out it was one basket.
Do you still think about it? Do you flash back on it?
I don't think about, God, if we had only done this or that. I don't do that. But every year at the final, I'm at the Final Four every year. And every year when the buzzer goes off, for some reason, and I think that's the reason, I shouldn't say for some reason, because of that, I'm way more empathetic to the loser than I would have been otherwise.
Have you talked even lately to Coach K about maybe you went into that delay game a little too soon?
No, because we won every time. We there were all kinds of mistakes in that one. That's not the issue. I think the funny part about that is, like, we've done a few things here and there about that team, media stuff. And he has said, and I hope it's not true, but he said that's his only regret is that he
Really?
didn't help. He felt like he didn't help us as much as he could have, and he wasn't experienced enough or all that. I don't think that's true, but it's interesting. Like when you lose earlier in the tournament, it doesn't hurt as much. When you lose when it's right there for you, that one sticks with you longer. And I don't know. Maybe if we had won that, we'd be intolerable talking about, well, that's what champions do. We'd walk around acting like big shots. But it is interesting. Like every time there's a team that is you're perceived as the better team and they don't win. I'm always kind of drawn to how interesting that is and what a difficult sort of challenge that is. And it's to me, that's what competition, like when people say they're a competitor, everybody says that. Everybody says I'm a competitor. No. But a competitor, the true definition to me of a competitor is one that acknowledges that I can get beat here. And how you handle getting beat is what reveals a competitor, in my view. Not so much, the striving to win and all. Everybody wants to win. But when you get beat, how do you handle it? And how do you respond to it?
Okay, so for these 30 years that you've been on ESPN, I have often felt for you because Duke obviously is always pretty to very good, and you have to figure out how to navigate through picking for or against Duke. And I've always wondered how frustrating it occasionally gets for you. You handle it great, but does it ever torment you or eat at you that you just can't win picking for or against Duke?
No. I mean, honestly, Skip, you've been in this business longer than I have. The best I can do is be fair and honest. And I don't think fair is that difficult. I think fair is really easy. The hard part is bias and being unfair. I don't play for Duke anymore. And everybody went to school somewhere. Of course, I love Duke, and I loved being there. But I don't care whether they win or lose. That's their problem. I'm not involved in that. And I have too much respect for these other programs that, they let you in, you see behind the scenes, you see how they do it. And so I respect the competition and the competitors too much. When Duke's the better team, you pick them. And now that's our job, is to pick them. That was never our job years ago. But when they're not, you say so. And hopefully over the years, you build up credibility doing that. If you don't, if people are, if it's a reasonable criticism, I'll listen to it. But I'm not going to listen to some unreasonable stuff about he went to Duke, therefore, you can't trust this or whatever. They can feel how they want to feel, but that doesn't make it true. But I've never worried about it. That's never been an issue for me. I understand the way this business works, and I don't have a problem with fans. I did have one experience that I'll tell you about really briefly. So years ago, this is probably 20 years ago, I spoke at a Duke alumni event, and right before that was I think it was the 2001. So it's longer than 20 years. 2001 Final Four. And I had picked Maryland to beat Duke in the semifinals of that. And they were up 22 at halftime, and Duke wound up coming back and won. Then they beat Arizona for the national championship. So when I opened it up for Q&A, one of the Duke alums had said, "Hey, you picked Maryland to beat Duke." And I said, "Yes, sir, I did." And he said, "That was a bad pick." I said, "Yep, it was. Duke won. You're right. It was incorrect." So he said, "Well, that should teach you never to pick against Duke again." And so that's fine. He's just a fan, nice guy and everything. So I said, "Sir, do you mind if I ask you a question?" I said, "You went to Duke, obviously. Do you pick Duke every year to win the championship?" And he said, "Yes, I do." And he was about 70 years old. And I said, "Well, congratulations. You're now 4 for 70.
That's right.
I mean, it
Bingo.
doesn't.
Touche.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
Okay, if you're going to pick them every time, then what's the value in that? Like I thought Maryland was going to win, and you could argue they should have, being up 22 at halftime. But so what? I don't like picking games because I don't know who's going to win. If I knew if I knew the team was going to win all these games, I would go to Vegas and I would quit my job in a second, and I would just be by the pool with a drink in my hand, raking it in.
Yet you're required to pick every single March Madness game.
Yeah,
right?
and some years I do really well. Like this year's one of them. I did really well.
You did.
Other years you don't do so well because we don't know. And so I'm not running around saying, "Hey, look what I just picked." I don't, if people want to use the picks in their pool, use them. If they don't, don't. If they want to blame me for what I say, blame me. If they want to take credit, use it and take credit for it on their own, go ahead. I don't kind of understand how. Well, I know how it happened, but years ago I was called a color commentator. Now I'm an analyst, and we were never asked years ago to pick winners.
No.
We were asked what's going to be important in this game. What should we look for? What are these teams' strengths? What's the game going to turn on? Give us the keys to the game. And now all anybody seems to want to know is who's going to win. And so I give my opinion on that, and I try to do it without reservation. Like, I'm not going to say, well, I think this team's going to win, but you never know. Like, I don't do it that way. I say, I think this team's going to win. Okay.
But Jay, your opinion is as qualified an opinion as there is out there for public consumption.
Well, that's kind of you to say, but nobody's qualified to pick these winners. These things are like, I have a great respect for people who analyze football. I don't understand football. I love it, but I don't know what a nickel defense versus cover two. And I don't know all that crap. But like, I did watch the Super Bowl, and I heard a bunch of them pick Kansas City, and Kansas City got drilled. And they know football. We don't know who's going to win these games. I don't know who's going to win the 100-yard dash in the Olympics or the 100-meter dash. I don't know.
Yet, Jay, I will say this. I do know the NFL pretty well, and I'm much better at picking NFL games. I in fact, had Philadelphia from before the year started to win the Super Bowl, and I'm usually pretty good on the NFL. And I'm terrible at March Madness. I'm a pool fool. It's bracket racket, because this is the most aptly nicknamed event in all of sports, because it is truly madness, because there are 18, 19-year-olds thrown into crazy situations, Boise, Idaho, wherever the first round game might be, at a crazy time, very early, very late, crazy shooting backgrounds, different referees, only 5 fouls. The games are shorter than NBA games, as you well know, and madness ensues, because that's hard to pick. It's way harder to pick these college basketball games, to me.
Yeah, and I think you're right, but I just think it's the nature of the game. All those things that you mentioned are certainly factors, but what I would liken it to is golf. That we can sit and try to say, okay, Tiger Woods is the best golfer, or Scotty Scheffler now, if you want to get more current. He's the favorite to win the Masters. All right, that's difficult. It's a difficult proposition, but then you take it to the world match play. And you go, all right, who's going to win this particular match? When it's match play, that's basketball. Like, basketball is the equivalent of match play. And,
yeah, it is. That's well said.
If these were 7-game series, my predictions would be a hell of a lot better. Just like, we could say, okay, in the early 90s, like, the Lakers were better than the Sixers. They should win. Then the Sixers win game 1 on the road. How are we going to account for that? We can't. and it's similar. I think it's similar in the tournament. This year we had a lot of chalk, and I think I was about to say everybody. There are a lot of people out there saying, well, this shows NIL in the portal, like the mid-majors are dead. And you go, wait a minute. 2 years ago, Florida Atlantic and San Diego State were in the Final Four in the NIL era, and everybody said, the earth is flat. Now the big shots aren't going to dominate anymore. It's all equal. Like, how did that change in 2 years? One data point doesn't make a trend.
Interesting.
And some years we have a bunch of upsets. Other years we have this. This is the first time, and only second time ever, first time since 2008, all the number 1 seeds have advanced to the Final Four. It happened in 2008. That's precedent. And there was no NIL, no portal. I mean, it happens once in a while. And sometimes we have 2 mid-majors in the Final Four. And we're not going to have the same results year after year. It's just not built that way.
Got it. Great point. By the way, quick aside on golf. When I first came out here from ESPN to LA to work for Fox, this was 2016, just before we started, I got to play Bel Air, that golf course that you know. And I happened to have a caddy who had caddied for you the week before at Bel Air. And we got 3 or 4 holes in, and he said, yeah, I got to caddy for Jay Bilas. He is such a good golfer. And he just shamed me. And I'm thinking to myself, and I'm chopped liver, right? And it stuck with me the whole round. Like, I'm no Jay Bilas, but I actually got going and played okay that day. So anyway, congratulations on the round you had at Bel Air. You must be really good at golf.
I love to play. That's at my age. That's the only thing I can do with my friends anymore that doesn't make me feel like a total degenerate.
I understand that feeling very well. This bracket season, FanDuel is letting you make the call because right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to bet on everything from clutch shots to last second heartbreaks, even on who's cutting down the nets in San Antonio. If you've been waiting to join, there is no better time than right now. Tourney action almost every day, and FanDuel has amazing bet types like spreads and totals and game props and so much more. My Saturday Final Four 3-leg parlay is take Duke over Houston by more than 4.5 points, take Auburn, a 2.5 point underdog, to upset Florida, win outright. And then close your eyes and take Cooper Flagg to score under 20 against Houston, even though I believe Duke wins by 10. Kelvin Sampson, the best coach in this Final Four, will do everything in his power to limit Cooper Flagg, who will keep doing all the little big things that make his teammates so much better and so unbeatable. But I don't think he'll score more than 20, though against Auburn, he could go for 40 in the championship game. Please visit FanDuel.com/skip and get in on the college hoops action all tourney long. I'll repeat, visit FanDuel.com/skip and have some fun. Okay, so you did pick 4 number ones, first time since 2008, and they all got there. And by the way, it was rock, chalk, but no Jayhawk. So we don't have Kansas, but we have 4 number 1 seeds. And yet, in the semifinal, you did pick Houston over the school you attended, Duke. And how do you feel about that pick at this point, having seen what you've seen up to this point?
I mean, it was a coin flip at the time. It's a coin flip now. As you know, they played each other last year in the Sweet 16. The game was, I can't remember the exact score. It was like 54-52, and Duke won before losing to NC State in the Elite Eight. I happen to believe that if Jamal Shead, the best player in the league for Houston, wasn't injured in the first half, that Houston would have won that game.
Okay.
Duke is far better this year than they were last year. I think they're playing the best. Duke and Florida are the 2 best teams in this Final Four. Of the 4, they're the 2 best of the 4 best teams that we have in the country all year long. If it's a 7-game series, I think Duke wins the 7-game series. In a one-off, I think that Houston has a great shot to win, and that's why I took them. I think they play a different way. They're incredibly physical, and I think they're going to give Duke a really hard time. I will not be surprised at any result. I will not. The only result I'll be surprised in if the game is 89-88. I think that game's going to be played in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
Because Houston's so physical and they control tempo so well.
By the way,
being older,
you did have a
more physical.
Go ahead.
I think being older and more physical gives
a big deal,
a little bit of an edge in this one particular matchup.
And by the way, they do lead the nation in 3-point shooting, Houston does. So you got to give them a little edge there also because they've done it consistently.
Yes, but the one caveat to that, Skip, would be Duke. Their defense is a little bit different than Houston's. They don't trap ball screens. They don't trap in the post. They're really long. They're athletic and really long-armed. It's not just their size, which is formidable, it's their length. And so do I think they can bother some of these shots that Houston takes? I do. I think that could be the difference, because Houston sometimes, as good as they are offensively, they don't take a ton of threes. They probably only make 7 or 8. Duke makes over 10. And are they going to get 10 against Houston? Unlikely. But they're probably the better offensive team, and I think Houston is the better defensive team. It's just a question of what's going to carry the day.
Well, by the way, Alabama was coming off 25 made threes against BYU and went 4 of 32 against Duke because of that length and the long contests out on the perimeter.
Yes, and Duke was able to do a couple things. They were able to limit Alabama in transition. I think their offense did that, Duke's offense. A lot of times in basketball, some people don't understand that the offense and defense are really connected, that if you run good offense, that really helps your defense.
Yep.
And Duke ran really good half-court offense. That helped them slow the tempo and helped keep Alabama out of transition. And then Duke made them play in the half-court more. And they're not as proficient in that regard. And Duke does a good job of protecting the paint. Like, I think Alabama's a driving team. They're not a three-point shooting team. Their threes come off drives and off offensive rebounds. And Duke was able to limit that, and as a result, really limit what Alabama could do.
By the way, you had a great line in your early prediction of Houston, Tennessee, saying it would require 3 Navy SEALs to referee that game. And it did, but Houston's just better. They're equally physical with Tennessee, but they're so mature. Yet they got 4 players who are like 22, 23.
Yeah, and they're built like men. They're all young men, but they're built like older men. And one of the things about Houston is they play that way all the time. So if another team did something that Houston does routinely, it might look like a foul to the officials. I think Houston, Tennessee, to some extent, maybe even Duke, they probably get away with a little bit more because that's what they do all the time. And it's kind of the old Bob Huggins thing of, hey, if I foul 50 times, they can only call 20 of them. So let's do it. And I'm not to say they're willy-nilly fouling. It's just the physicality of the game. If others did that periodically, it'd probably look like a foul if they did it. And that's always been kind of an issue of mine with officiating is why don't you call some of this stuff? But they have their own job, and I don't understand their job.
Yeah. Okay, so I could be wrong about this, but I did pick Duke to win it all, and my logic was simply Duke has Cooper Flagg and nobody else has Cooper Flagg. So what have you seen so far from that very young man in tournament action?
Well, first of all, that's good logic. Because, the old days you could tell a Final Four or national championship contender by how many pros do they have. And Duke's got a lot of pros. They probably have more pros than any other team. I think they're the most talented team. Flagg is, he's a different cat now. It's not only his skill set and his size and length. That's one thing. He's got everything you want in a basketball player. But it's his level of competitive spirit and character.
Yeah.
I think he's a lot like Leitner was back in the 90s, that, there are levels to everything. There's levels of shooters. Guy could be an outstanding shooter, but then there's Steph Curry or something like that. There's levels of competitors. And this guy is on the top tier of competitors. Nothing phases him. He's not afraid of anything. And he plays every single play like it's the only play of the game. Yeah. And very few players do that. He's in a different category that way. And I think, honestly, that's what sets him apart. There are other uber talented guys but he's on the top tier of those two. And when you think about, he's only 18, he just turned 18 in December. It's kind of hard to fathom a kid being that good that early. And he's already gotten better over the course of the season. I think he's the best player in this tournament by far.
So you do a lot of work on the NBA draft. What What would you say is his NBA ceiling as you see him right now?
Perennial all-star. I think Grant Hill is the best player Duke's ever had. And I think he proved that not only in college, but with what he did his first 6 or 7 years in the NBA. Yeah. He was the direct counterpart to Jordan. He was 5 times All NBA his first 7 years in the league. I mean, that's Hall of Fame by itself. He was like, I always likened him to like the Sandy Koufax of the NBA. You know, that level of performance didn't go on a long time because of injury. No. But
that's a good analogy. Yeah.
When he shone brightly, he was among the best to ever do it. And I think Flagg, I feel like Flagg's the best player that's been there since him. I really, really believe that. And I think if you compare Cooper Flagg to Grant Hill as freshman, it's Cooper Flagg. Now, will he turn into what Grant Hill became later on? We'll see. But he's got that sort of aptitude, both ability-wise and his makeup, because Grant didn't see himself as being the best player when he was a freshman. This guy does. Yeah. They're wired differently as young people. Now, Grant ultimately became all that.
He did.
But he did. I don't think Grant had any idea how good he was when he was 18. This guy knows.
Okay, take it a level higher. I think we all regard Larry Bird as the greatest American white player ever. How close could Cooper Flagg get to Larry Bird?
In everything but shooting, maybe passing. I mean, Bird was an extraordinary passer, likes of which we don't see very often, even among the greatest passers. He is not the shooter Bird was. No way. But everything, he's bigger. He's way more athletic. He's way better of a defender. He's an impact defender, kind of like Pippen was an impact defender. That's the kind
of good analogy. Yep.
Or Kirilenko, guys like that.
Yeah.
But it's so hard to he's got some Bird-like traits, but boy, you kind of hesitate to compare him with that kind of ceiling. I don't know about that. That might be a bridge too far yet, because I'm sure if I saw Larry Bird, and I didn't, when he was a freshman, I would have felt differently about Larry Bird as a freshman. When he was a senior, and you remember that, Skip, that was back when Game of the Week was literal. When I have
Singular.
Friends,
yep.
Hey, the game was better back then because, boy, we could watch Larry Bird for 4 years. I'm like, stop it. You didn't watch Larry Bird for 4 years.
Nope.
You watched him for 2 months his senior year. The guys were not on television back then.
No,
we didn't have this kind of ubiquitous, 25 games on a night. And you saw the Missouri Valley Conference whenever you wanted and could watch it on your phone. We didn't have that. Most people probably, when they read about Larry Bird, didn't know whether he was black or white at the time. And they found out when he was a senior.
Yeah,
but they probably didn't know it before then or before he was a junior.
Good point. Yeah, first time I laid eyes on television on Larry Bird was in the regional final against Sidney Moncrief's Arkansas, which they won in an upset. And then here they came against Mark Aguirre's DePaul in the national semifinal. And I was there in Salt Lake for that. And he knocked my eyes out. And then it led to a watershed championship game against Magic, obviously. But remember, Larry was 23 years of age at that point. So he'd been playing a whole lot of college basketball.
Yeah, and that's sort of the difference between now and then is now you're having to project out a Cooper Flagg as to what he can be.
Yeah.
And you're going, we need to – I think one of the things I try to do, it's not always easy, is you try to look at, okay, if I'm comparing him to this guy, what was this guy as a freshman? Because that's what Cooper Flagg is now. And there are a lot of great players that don't get to Cooper Flagg's level when they're 23. And he's doing this at 18, and look how much better he's become in 1 year. The knock on him at first was he couldn't shoot, and now he's knocking threes down at a high percentage, and he's being guarded, and he's putting up these ridiculous numbers. He doesn't seem to care whether he scores, passes, or all that, but he plays his tail off every possession, which doesn't always happen at any age. He's special, and he's one of the guys that I feel strongest about coming into the draft at an early age. Like LeBron, I felt like I knew. Like this guy,
Sure.
LeBron was the best high school player I had ever seen. And when I sat him on the air,
got it.
well,
Agree.
I got criticized for that. Like, how can you say that? And I was like, because he is. I mean, he's better than Kobe Bryant was at that age because he's more physically imposing with all the skills. He's better than Garnett at that age. And they say, well, what about Alcindor and Oscar Wright? Like, how old do you think I am? I didn't see Lou Alcindor when he played in high school at Power Memorial, but I felt that way, and I feel similarly about this guy.
And yet, as you know, Cooper Flagg is 3 months into his 18th year on this planet. And I agree with you about the shooting. I can't go Larry Bird on the shooting, but I do give him a chance to continue to improve over the next 3, 4, 5, 10 years, because in 20 ACC games, Cooper Flagg made 44% of his threes. He was low volume, but he still made 44%. So I think there's potential there to get better as a shooter. Not maybe Larry Bird great, but pretty great.
I agree. I mean, he's going to continue to get better, I think, in every facet. I just wouldn't classify him as a natural shooter. That's not who he is. He's natural. He's a natural in so many other things, but his shooting is going to continue to improve, and to where I don't think it's going to be an issue for him. He'll have to be guarded on every space, every area of the floor. That's how talented he is. And he's going to blend in with any team seamlessly because he can do so many things. And I really believe this about him, that winning is the most important thing. Like this is a I hope this is not too weird of a story, but early in the season before the season started, I was up visiting some different places and watching practice, and I happened to be at Duke, and John Shire asked me, hey, would you mind speaking to the team? And I always preface those things when I talk to the team by saying, hey, I sat where you're sitting, and I loved it when a 60-year-old guy came and gave a lecture. But while I was talking to him, Flagg was sitting, as I was facing the team, he was sitting to my right, and he had a notepad out, and he was taking notes of what I was saying. And honestly, my first reaction was, here we go. Eddie Haskell is over there taking notes.
Exactly. Yeah.
And but then I realized after time and talking to him afterwards that he really wanted to learn something. And not that he learned anything from me. I'm not saying he did, but he takes advantage of opportunities. And as long as he's in there, he's going to take advantage of it. He's just kind of built a different way. And I wouldn't have done that. I would have been waiting. Coach K had some great people speak to us. Not that I put myself among them, but I'd be thinking about, when is this going to be over so we can move on?
Exactly. Yeah. I don't think that's a weird story. I think it's a very telling story, and I appreciate you sharing it. And by the way, I would share with you, I'm close friends with Rick Barry. Do you know Rick at all?
Very well.
Obviously before your time a bit, but Rick was a great player that a lot of the kids today just can't appreciate, but he was a 6'7" gazelle, could just run the floor, very athletic, and could shoot it, and shot the granny free throw underhanded and made 91% career. And Rick can be a little bit of a curmudgeon and a skeptic about today's players. And when I asked him about Cooper Flagg, he just laughed and said, he's special. He's way better than I said, Rick, better than you? Oh, come on. I couldn't jump like this. He can quick jump. He can second jump. He just said the whole package is better than what I had. Well, that's when I said, oh, okay, I'll take that to my bank from Rick Barry.
Yeah, and that shows, like, Rick is one of the more cerebral, thoughtful basketball people I've ever been around, to the point where you can't get through a meal with him because he's diagramming plays using salt shakers, and he actually does that. But I think that's one of the great things about some of the older guys, that myself included, when you're willing to say, look, we had our time. Like, let's look at what these guys are doing now and kind of marvel at it. It doesn't mean that if Rick Barry didn't have all the tools of today with the rest and recovery and how players are brought up in the game and all that they wouldn't be just as good, if not better, if you move these guys back in the day and they had the obstacles that the players in the 60s and 70s had, that they wouldn't, it wouldn't be the same. Of course it would be the same. But I marvel at these young players and what they're able to do, because the game is so different now. It's so much harder to play now than it used to be. Way harder. You know, like Rick didn't have a 3-point line, and nor did I. And when my friends now that I played with will say, well, these big guys aren't doing this or that, I go, come on, man. Like, that guy just had to guard 4 ball screens and then get back down the post and switch out. And we never had to guard a single ball screen when we were in college. And not one. Nobody ran them back then. Our jobs were way easier than these guys. And I marvel at what they do.
Okay, speaking of older gentlemen, there's one named Kelvin Sampson, who I consider the best coach left in this tournament, just on longevity, and been there and done that at so many places in so many ways. How much of a factor do you think he is in this game? Not to take I'm taking nothing away from Coach Shire, but just on longevity and wisdom and experience.
I think the longevity, wisdom, and experience helps in preparation. It certainly can help in decisions that are made in game, but I tend to think a lot of that is maybe overstated. You know, there aren't a lot of coaches that are going to draw up a new play during the course of a game. They're usually going to go with what they've taught and what they've prepared, and they may tweak it. They may say, look, on this play, slip that screen instead of setting it. There are certain things you can do in the course of a game. But Kelvin's a rock. I've known him for a long, long time, and he's one of the not only the people, but coaches I respect most, because he's never changed what his core principles are. He's changed a lot of things, but his core principles are the same as they've always been. And his teams are always tough. They don't always win every game. Nobody does that. But they're going to be ultra prepared. And I think the experience that they had last year, falling short to Duke, is going to fuel them in their preparation. I don't think that stuff helps once the game goes on. I don't think this crusade business during the 40 minutes or 40 plus really helps. I think it helps in sharpening your preparation. And I think they're going to be sharpened by what happened to them last year, because I do think last year they were the better team. This year, I don't think they are. I think they're better in certain aspects of the game, but Duke overall is more talented and they're better. And it's going to take an extraordinary effort on Houston's part, but I think they're up to it.
Okay. Now let's look at the other semifinal. And speaking of what happened last time, February 5th at Auburn, Florida did a number on Auburn, was up 21 and won by 9, 90-81. How much stock do you put in that game as it impacts this game?
Similar for Auburn in that it's a sharpening tool for them. That last time they played Florida, they got beat at home. Florida didn't have Elijah Martin, their second leading scorer, in that game. And I called the game with Dan Shulman, and I thought, okay, well, Auburn's at home. They're full strength. They're going to win. And they got up like 9 or 10-0. And Florida wound up kind of going away. I didn't expect Florida to be dribbling the clock out, short down a man as important as Elijah Martin. And I think Todd Golden there, who used to be an assistant to Bruce Pearl years ago, has done an extraordinary job with that team. Their personnel is probably a little bit better than Auburn's. Their guards are the equal of Auburn's, which is saying something. And they have more big guys. They're different teams, but they're two of the very best teams in the country, and they know each other really well. If they were playing somebody else, like one of the things that the challenges that Duke has in this are Duke hasn't played in a lot of close games. And how are they going to respond when they're in a really close game of this magnitude when they haven't lived there? The other 3 teams are not only older generally, their key guys are older, but they live in close games. I don't think and who knows how people are going to respond under that kind of pressure. But I think that's an advantage to the other three if it gets down to the end of a game. Now, is that going to carry the day? Who knows? But it is an advantage. It's a check mark in their favor. But I think the Auburn Florida game is a coin flip. I think it's going to come down to rebounding, frankly, and I think it's going to come down to and turnovers have been an issue a little bit for Florida, but Florida's got something that Auburn doesn't. They've got Walter Clayton Jr., who is everything breaks down. He can actually go get a bucket by himself. And not many teams have that kind of player, and they've got him.
Man, Jay, I thought they were cooked against Texas Tech. They're down 10 with 5 minutes to go, and Toppin has a wide open three and was just a little long back iron. If that goes down, it's 13, and then they're up 9 with 3 or so minutes left, 3:14 left. And Florida can flurry like nobody can flurry, especially because of Walter Clayton Jr., and he just takes over and wills it, and he willed that one home.
He did. But they also had down 9 with 3 minutes to go. Thomas Houck, their sophomore big guy, knocks down 2 threes.
He did.
One of the most important things in that. So in any type of scenario where you've got a comeback like that, you've got a team in Texas Tech's position where there were a couple things they didn't do that had they done, we wouldn't be talking about this. Texas Tech missed the front end of 2 1-and-1.
Yep.
And they make those, even if they make 2 of those, 2 of the 4 free throws they could have had.
Agreed.
It may be a different outcome.
I agree.
That's sort of how this thing works. But I think it's got to be a confidence builder for Florida that they will feel like they're never out of it. The flip side of that is, you can't get down 9 too many times against these caliber of teams with 3 minutes to go. You get down 9 against Auburn or down 9 against Duke or Houston. Don't expect to come back from that.
And by the way, what is Broom's NBA ceiling in your eyes?
I think he'll play in the NBA, but I think his game is a little bit different than the NBA demands now. 20 years ago, I think you would see him valued a little bit differently. But right now, it's a spread court. Can you knock down a 3 and stretch the defense type of game? Drew Timme, who played at Gonzaga and one of the great college players I've seen, they're going, I don't know about him in the NBA. Who's he going to guard? And then they called him up. He gets called up while he was playing in the G League, gets called up while he's playing, FIFA video game, goes in the NBA, and he's done extraordinarily well.
He has.
And so there are spots in the NBA. It doesn't mean that, like, Cooper Flagg is a no-brainer.
Yeah.
There's some thought that needs to go into Johni Broome, but as far as do you draft him? But I think he will play in the NBA because he can rebound. He's a unique talent. But I don't see anybody taking him in the first round. The game's changed.
Okay, interesting. Good perspective. And then there's Coach Pearl, who you know very well and you've worked closely with. Describe him in your eyes as a basketball coach.
One of the true greats. This is a really odd one. So when I was growing up in Southern California, one of the places I visited was Stanford. And I committed to Duke in December, but there was only one signing period back then. It was in April. So I couldn't sign. I had to wait till April. And the coach that recruited me at Stanford got fired. And Dr. Tom Davis took the job, and Bruce Pearl was one of his assistants. So Stanford called me to see if I would still have interest in Stanford, if I'd be willing to sort of reopen my recruitment. And I said no. The coach that called me, and it was his first recruiting call ever, was Bruce Pearl.
That's a good story.
I was his first recruiting call ever. So
you turned him down.
Things have definitely improved. He's called better players since his first call. But, Bruce, when I was doing the NCAA tournament with CBS years ago, he was at Milwaukee. And I called one of his games in the tournament and really got to know him then. I was like, man, this guy's really good. And had a lot of Tom Davis stuff in his arsenal, a lot of that, flex stuff, which they still run today. And he's extraordinarily well prepared. He's an unbelievable salesperson.
He is.
His program and for the game. and he really demanding, but at the same time, he will. Like he's got a player on his team named Chad Baker Mazzara, who he refers to as he's crazy, but he's my crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So he'll work with the stuff
He
that
will.
other coaches might not tolerate,
Yeah.
but he coaches the whole person and gets the best out of these guys. And I think honestly, Skip, I knew when he took the Auburn job, I knew he would do well. I did not imagine he would do this.
Like this. Yeah.
Not close. That's to me, it's Bruce at Auburn and Jim Calhoun at UConn
Wow.
have created something out of nothing, more so than any coaches I could think of.
You know, I don't know Bruce the way you do, but I know him a little enough to say he has great, and I don't want this to come off wrong, but he has great con artistry, as in a very positive way. He knows how to push the right buttons in college kids, and they're still themselves, but they do as he says. They play disciplined basketball while remaining personalities, and I love that about him because to me he's the best motivator in college basketball. That's what it comes down to.
I think that's right, and part of that might be because he's a personality. He's a character, which a lot of people like to say we don't have anymore. But like Bruce would have been an unbelievable salesperson, and it's not just what he has garnered out of his players. He's sold that program to the masses. Like now, that's an unbelievably tough ticket at Auburn. It's sort of in the realm of a football ticket. Like you can't get in that building, and everybody's really excited. I never thought I'd see that out of that, and that's happened throughout the league. But he's really sold that and sold SEC basketball. He's been as big of a catalyst for the rise in SEC basketball as anything. That's how strong of a personality he is in that regard.
Okay, to sum it up, you're sticking with Houston and then Florida to win it all, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason to change because I don't. If I saw something that I thought would change my mind, because it's not like I was crazy confident about it when I picked it on Selection Sunday, but I figured why not just stay with it? I don't really think about it like who's going to win that much. It's more, man, this is going to be, God, I'm going to go back and watch the tapes of the games that the teams played. I don't know. I'll probably watch the Houston Duke game from last year. I don't know how much that's going to tell me, but I'll do it anyway. But I've called enough of their games all year long to have a good feeling for what could happen. But I can't wait to see it. I mean, to me, you couldn't ask for anything better than what we're going to get in San Antonio.
Okay, two quick thoughts on two other coaches not in the Final Four. In my picks, I did have St. John's upsetting Florida to advance to the Final Four. And I thought the shock to me, the upset of the tournament was Coach Cal in Arkansas over St. John's. Your thoughts on what transpired down the stretch? RJ Lewis, obviously the Big East Player of the Year. He's 3 for 17, and Coach Pitino just said, okay, that's enough. You're going to come sit by me and watch the end of this game. Your thoughts on how all that played out?
I don't know what was going on in the huddles or on the bench. So in the abstract, would it surprise me that he didn't play down the stretch? Well, of course. But at the same time, it's not like Rick doesn't know what buttons to push. And when he's pushing them for a period of time and they're not working, if he sees another avenue that's going to give him a better chance to win, he's not going to worry about it. He's going to do what it takes to win. The thing that surprised me more than Lewis not playing down the stretch was I thought they would have gone to Zuby Ejiofor a little bit more. He had 23 points. He was very efficient throughout the game. And he'd already fouled out one of Arkansas's big guys, and the other one, Jonas Adu, had 4 fouls. And I thought, go into him more often. But it's easy to play armchair coach. But that was one of the things that I kind of enjoyed about that game was, both Rick Pitino and John Calipari kind of resurrected some things from their past. And Rick's one of the greatest teachers of the game and greatest coaches I've ever seen. And so is John in a different way. But John kind of went back to his UMass refuse to lose days, and the underdog, nobody believes in us mentality, and did an extraordinary job. So like for Calipari to leave Kentucky and then go to Arkansas, which is not your normal move, and then go back into Rupp and win shorthanded, and then go against an old rival in Pitino and win. Vindication is the wrong word, but that had to feel really good for him.
Oh.
And it was certainly a boost in the shot in the arm to the Arkansas program going forward. But man, two guys that just their presence elevates the game, and it shows that time and winning are a great cleanser.
Yeah, that's for sure. I could be wrong about this, but to me, that game came across as Coach Pitino really wanted to win that game in some part because it was Calipari. And I think that message got delivered subliminally to his team, and they played a little tighter than Coach Cal's team played because his big message to them was, let's just go out and have fun. And it looked like Arkansas was having more fun than Coach Pitino's team was.
I think that's probably true. I don't think it was necessarily the Pitino Calipari factor that was in it. I think it was just that moment of, that both those teams had an opportunity to do something extraordinary. And it's really interesting at the end of those games, the weight that the favorite can feel. And I've struggled with this in a lot of different areas of sort of playing to win rather than having not losing, playing not to lose in your mind, like hanging on to something that you don't have yet. Coach K was always really helpful in that regard, but that's a very real emotion when you feel like you're supposed to win and everybody thinks you're supposed to win, of playing not to lose. And Arkansas didn't have to worry about that. They could have worried about it, but they didn't.
Okay. Coach Hurley at UConn, what have you seen in his coaching evolution? Obviously, he had to apologize for some remarks he made as he left the court the other day to the Baylor players. What are you seeing from him in the big picture?
One of the truly great coaches I've seen. He certainly has the pedigree with the family he grew up in. He has had a rough ride, being compared to his brother, being compared to his father. It has not been easy for him, and I accept that and acknowledge it, that's part of this whole journey. I don't think some of the things that we've been talking about, myself included, when asked about it, about his issues, how he behaves with officials, what you heard in the hallway afterwards. Do I think that's a big deal? I don't. But I think if he would acknowledge, and he has, that I should be better there, that should be the end of the discussion. Like, I'm not interested in hearing the reasons why or excuses for it. Like, if we all acknowledge you should do better, then do better. I think it was Dan Patrick recently asked me, well, what if he's not capable of change? Well, then we don't need to worry about it. Like, if he's not capable of it, what are we worried about? But I think we're going under the assumption that he is capable of doing better. So do better. And it always kind of frosts me a little bit that coaches who talk about, and it's not just him, but generally coaches that talk about accountability and no excuses are sometimes unwilling to be accountable for their own stuff and not make excuses for their own stuff. Nobody's saying he has to change how he coaches or change how competitive he is or change how he is in practice. But, if we're dealing with situations where he has problems with officials, then stop doing that. And is it so hard to, when you hear something from the stands, keep walking without saying anything and then say to your assistants, hey, we got screwed? A lot of coaches do that. But if you start shouting it out publicly, don't be surprised when somebody hears it and holds you accountable for it. That's all. That's my only point.
Jay, is it possible that Dan Hurley had to sort of coach in the shadows in his family for so long, shadows of his father and brother, that once he started to have success, he got a little too full of himself with his sideline antics and showmanship and sort of went occasionally over the edge as a sideline showman? Is that possible?
I'm sure that's what happened. And I don't have any issue with all that stuff. Those may be reasons for it, but I could be rude to airline personnel.
Yeah.
Say, well, it was just how I was raised. That's who I am. I don't think that's a very good excuse for that behavior. I should stop doing that. That kind of thing. I mean, not equating the two, but just as an absurd example. He's getting questioned over, how he behaved at the Maui Invitational, and then chasing an official out on the floor and saying, how dare you? I'm the best coach in this effing sport.
He did. Yeah.
And then the thing after the loss in the NCAA tournament. You lost to Florida. It's not. I know it hurts, and I get it. People say, "Well, I'm a competitor." That's an excuse. Just stop doing it. It's not that big of a deal. Apologize and move on. It's not that big of a deal.
Okay, my last question to you is an NBA question concerning my Oklahoma City Thunder, and I ask this question of you because you do know the NBA. My Thunder play like a college basketball team to me. I call them the Oklahoma City University Thunder because it's all for one and one for all, and I believe it's 1,000% authentic, and I've never seen anything quite like it from a pro basketball team. Are you buying that for a reason for their success?
Yeah. I mean, Mark Daigneault's done a great job. He used to be at the University of Florida. He's a remarkable young coach.
He is.
They're uber talented, and they've done a really good job of putting that team together for today's game. They've got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is one of the best players I've ever seen.
He is.
But they all are willing participants in doing what it takes to win. To me, Skip, the interesting thing, or one of the interesting things about Oklahoma City is, how do we sell to the public how good they are when we're a name brand culture? We're going to have to get used to Oklahoma City being in the finals. And they may be there for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what will happen. Today's game's different with the second apron and how contracts work and the collective bargaining agreement, but we better get used to having them around. And it seems like we're not as willing to acknowledge, hey, we need to pay attention to these guys. They need to be on more. I get it. They're not the Celtics or the Warriors right now, or the Lakers.
No.
Where we have the older established guys that are capturing eyeballs, but these are going to be where eyeballs are going to be forced to watch. And we better start preparing for it. And I'm not sure we have. And I don't know whether that's a failing on our part in the media, but that's kind of interested me, that sort of the big brand thing. I get it. We're an analytics business too. We go where the viewership is going to take us, but the viewers are going to have to watch these guys. And
Jay,
I'm not sure we're prepared.
No, statistically, they are performing at the highest level of any team in the history of this league. All the stats across the board, victory margin, all these everything, offense, defense, the best season ever, not acknowledged yet, not given credit for yet. Because most people won't say, well, validate, back it up, show us.
You're right.
When it's time. Jay, I'm enlightened. I appreciate your time and your insight, and I hope you don't run out of words before next Monday night, because you used up a few for me, and I do appreciate that.
No, I appreciate it, Skip. Thank you for having me.
It was a pleasure. That is it for Skip One-on-One. I will see you next week.